everyone, welcome back to my channel today. How many of you struggle with boundaries? I feel like that's such a common problem that people really struggle with, is setting boundaries with other people, saying no, not people pleasing all the time, and really honoring ourselves to set limits in terms of what we feel comfortable with. And it really is a struggle because there's all these expectations that not only you have to act a certain way or that you should take more responsibility for other people's feelings and kind of ignore your own, which is a real problem because it's so important to respect our own feelings and honor what we feel comfortable with and when we should really be saying no. And this could be in so many different settings. It could have developed from things you've learned as a child. And it's just very hard to break out of those patterns and those cycles and redirect our mindset to really focusing on ourselves. So if you struggle with setting boundaries and it really negatively impacts your life, stick around for this video because we're going to be talking about what boundaries even are, what areas of our life they can show up in, and just steps to start getting ourselves comfortable with setting boundaries with others. My name is Eva and I'm a licensed therapist, and don't forget to like this video, give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and comment down below your relationship with boundaries, if it's difficult with you, or even ways that you've begun to practice setting boundaries with others. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to just start this video off by talking about what boundaries actually are. Sometimes the line can get kind of fuzzy, and I think some people even question, like, is what I'm saying a boundary, or am I just being rude? Or how do I even communicate this at all? I think that's so common, people trying to set boundaries and coming across a certain way that they don't want to come across as. So what is boundary? It's basically a line you're drawing to respect our level of comfort. And this could be a physical line you're drawing. It could be a verbal communication line that you're drawing. There's many different areas that boundaries can lie in, many different settings too that boundaries can be practiced in. And they're all equally important. It's kind of where you stand in each area and ways you can begin practicing boundaries in all of these areas. I think a few really important things to note is that a lot of us learn boundaries or begin to build a relationship with boundaries when you're a child. So if you grew up in a household where it was almost normal for your boundaries to get crossed on a regular basis, then we begin to learn that behavior and we begin to ignore our own needs, even growing up as an adult. And it's kind of like what's expected at that point. We never really begin to develop a healthy and positive relationship with ourselves and what we need and what our boundaries actually are. And it's been shown that in households where boundaries are practiced in a healthy way, that those children grow up with a better sense of self, higher self-esteem, higher self-worth, and higher quality of life. Those who grew up in environments where their needs were ignored or parents valued their own needs or boundaries over the needs of the child, that child will grow up more likely becoming a people pleaser or someone who doesn't tend to focus on their own needs first, or at least as equally as they focus on other people. If you've grown up in a household like that, I'm wondering if you are much more perceptive to other people's needs and feelings than your own, because that is very common in households like that and children who grow up in households like that, where you are constantly in tune with the feelings of others, but you struggle with being in tune with your own feelings and even identifying what your feelings even are. Or if you do say something or you do stick up for yourself, there's immediate guilt and shame right afterward, just putting yourself down, thinking, wow, I really shouldn't have said that. What's wrong with me? I don't want to hurt their feelings. Oh, now they're going to think of me a certain way. All of these thoughts are very common. I think with this being said, another good point when it comes to talking about boundaries is recognizing the fact that other people are not mind readers, or they might not be as aware of their actions or their behaviors. So it's very important to communicate very clearly to others where your boundaries lie and what you expect from them, rather than waiting around for them to figure it out or to somewhat communicate it, but it's not very clear, so the other person isn't really getting the message. If you've ever tried to draw the line, but the other person just keeps repeating that behavior or keeps saying the same things to you that are crossing your boundaries, it might be because they're just not getting it. It hasn't been communicated clearly enough, but the responsibility does lie on you to effectively communicate your boundaries rather than trying to expect someone else to recognize their own behaviors and change. So I think that the first step when it comes to boundaries is just becoming self-aware of what boundaries are, which is what we just discussed, and also what your boundaries individually are. So just taking a minute to think about, well, what even are my boundaries? Well, let's see. How do I feel when people use this much of my time? Or how do I feel when someone speaks to me this way? Or how do I feel when someone touches me a certain way? Or, all of these different areas. Do you have a sense of what your priorities are in these different areas? Do you have a sense of what you need from other people? What makes you feel uncomfortable? Any experiences you've had previously in your life that have made you feel uncomfortable or where someone has crossed your boundary? And for someone who is a people pleaser or does focus on other people's feelings, it can take a bit to redirect to yourself. So if you are one of those people, just take a minute to sit and think of a situation where someone crossed your boundary. And instead of thinking about what they did to you, think about how it made you feel. Really process your emotions and think about, okay, what was I feeling in that moment? Was it anger? Was it sadness? Was it guilt? Was it shame? And think about why. And that might give you a clue to what your boundaries are, what you had hoped had gone differently. So just getting a better sense of what your boundaries are, where they lie, what's most important to you, and what your priorities are. This also kind of takes the power away from someone else and gives it back to you. So you want that power to own yourself and say, okay, I have the right to express my boundaries to other people. And if they don't like it, then that's their problem. And that takes a lot, for someone who is so used to doing everything for others and taking that responsibility of caring for other people's feelings. It takes a lot to take that power and say, I actually don't care what you think of my boundary or what you think of me. And that's huge. I guarantee if you're a people pleaser that you do care what people think of you. And it's very important to make that mindset shift away from that. So there are different types of boundaries, and I did want to point out the difference between hard boundaries and soft boundaries. So hard boundaries are basically non-negotiables. It's either this way or the highway. And if you like it, if you don't like it, doesn't matter. It's unacceptable in my book. A good example of this would be any sort of physical harm. So if someone's inflicting physical harm on you, that would be a hard boundary of saying that's completely unacceptable and this needs to end. Soft boundaries are a little bit more flexible, where you do want to encourage that line being drawn, but it's a little bit more flexible in terms of how it's done. There's some leeway and some time to get to the point where you want to be. Or it might change on a day-to-day basis, but it's just something that you're aware of. So it might sound a little bit confusing, but a good example of this one would be saying no to going out if you don't want to hang out with people or spend time with certain family members. Sometimes you might want to, or sometimes you might have the energy to, but other times, just being mindful of saying, no, I really don't want to go out, or I'm not available. And that's a soft boundary that you can practice. Another soft boundary would be not responding to emails outside of work. Now, that could be a hard boundary if you're really strict about not doing that. And I do talk about things like that in my work burnout video, which I will have linked above, but kind of setting those work boundaries, which is another area that people struggle with boundaries, is with work expectations, workload, expectations from your boss. And so there could be a combination of hard and soft boundaries in that setting. But if you say, okay, well, sometimes I'll respond to emails and you're comfortable with that, and other times if you're, say, on vacation and you just don't want to respond to emails, then in those cases you would say, okay, I'm not going to be responding to those. So again, that flexibility where sometimes you might be okay with it, or sometimes you might not want to do that, or something that doesn't have this make it or break it mentality. Wow, the lighting is getting really not good. I'm going to go put some lights on. Okay, I think that's a little better. Oh, you can even see my lights on my TV reflection. Okay, so just to reiterate, again, taking that focus away from others and putting it on you. And this was the next point I wanted to make. So being okay with saying, wow, my feelings do matter as much as their feelings do. So let me actually take the power back to myself and recognize what I need in this moment. And despite feeling guilt or shame or sadness or anger, whatever you're feeling when you do set these boundaries, that might be very uncomfortable for you to do in the beginning, just know that a lot of the times when you do set boundaries, your quality of life will probably improve because you're starting to let people know what you find acceptable and unacceptable, which the people around you probably aren't even aware of. They don't even know because you haven't been setting these boundaries. So they'll begin to change. Their behaviors and thought patterns will begin to change. They won't feel like they can just get whatever they want from you or expect you to give them what they want. And that can be a huge shift, but overall, this could actually improve your relationships with other people, improve just your sense of well-being and happiness, and just make your life better overall, even though in the beginning it might be difficult. It might take time to get to that place, but a lot of the time people do not regret setting boundaries in terms of their own well-being. And I wanted to talk about clear communication as well. And I did mention this earlier, so it is important to clearly communicate your boundaries and not to sugarcoat it or make it kind of vague, or to kind of say, well, I kind of don't like when you do that, and I wish you wouldn't do that, and or even the I wish, even the I wish is giving someone else the power. So it's saying, I wish you wouldn't do this, almost like you don't have a say in your own line that you're drawing. So let's step away from that and move into, I don't like when you do this, so it needs to stop. Or, I'm not available today. Thank you for asking me, but let's maybe schedule another time to do this. Or, when you touch me like that, that makes me uncomfortable, so let's not do that anymore. Something, any way that you feel comfortable with. And I will be making a video on exercises and techniques that you can practice to begin setting these boundaries. I know that a lot of people would have different ways of setting boundaries. Some people would prefer to be very strict about how they set boundaries, and other people have a harder time and want to kind of come across in a gentle way, a stern but a gentle and kind way of saying, hey, this is unacceptable. So there's different ways of even expressing boundaries, which, again, I will be making a video on if people are interested to help you begin to practice this. But I think the point here is to not expect other people to change unless you are clearly communicating your boundaries and expressing what you need, and not just what you want or what you wish they would do, but what you expect from them. The next point I wanted to make is to start small and practice. So it may take a few times. It might take feeling uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, because when we people please, we feel comfortable. That's a safe place for a lot of people because they are not causing conflict. They are not causing any sort of uncomfortable feelings for the other person. And they're viewed as someone who is very compliant and understanding. And I can't imagine people pleasers are ever viewed as someone in a negative light by the people who are sometimes taking advantage of them. So, and I think people pleasers, and comment down below if you relate to this, get something out of that because it's almost like feeling accepted by other people, accepted and appreciated and needed. But again, this can be related to a trauma response. This can be related to just, your childhood and how you grew up. And it's almost just like an unhealthy way of coping instead of really owning yourself and recognizing your worth. So a very important distinction to make, that it could be uncomfortable, but feeling uncomfortable is almost necessary to grow in this particular situation with this particular issue. Some people may respond positively and say something like, hey, I didn't know you felt that way, so I'll work on that and I'll try to respect your boundaries. And other people will not be happy. They will be very angry because, again, it's not what they're used to. Someone who usually gives them what they want or that they can cross boundaries with, drawing a line and saying no, finally, that they may respond in a very negative way and see you now as someone who is not compliant, someone who is not understanding to their needs and what they want, and they might get frustrated. But again, that's something that you have to become comfortable with, is knowing that someone may respond negatively and may not appreciate your boundaries or respect them, but still drawing the line regardless. And one more point I wanted to make was just giving examples of different boundaries in different areas. So like I said, there's boundaries in so many different areas of your life and different ways you can express your boundaries. And you might be very comfortable with setting boundaries in one area, and then another area, you have no idea what your boundaries are and you're trying to figure that out. So I already gave an example of a physical boundary. So an emotional boundary may be, you're gaslighting me right now, recognizing when someone's gaslighting you. And instead of doing something to protect their feelings or to just go along with it to avoid conflict, saying something and saying, no, actually, what I'm feeling is valid and I need you to respect my boundaries and stop. This is also along with a behavioral boundary. So if someone's speaking to you a certain way, saying, I don't like how you're speaking to me and it needs to stop. Boundaries can also be involved in time, space, your own items or materials. So with time, it could be setting time limits with regard to time with family members that are unhealthy. Like during the holidays, some people might need time restrictions on spending time with family members that just really negatively impact their well-being and just increase stress, or family members who just constantly cross boundaries. So that could be a great time to practice setting time boundaries, practicing safe spaces. So if your house is your safe space, or your office is your safe space, whatever it is, your car even is your safe space, recognizing that. And if people begin to disrespect your safe spaces or your boundaries that you set in terms of your own space that you can maybe escape to or that you feel comfortable in, that would be an example of that. So having people over your house for a certain amount of time, again, so there is overlap, so you can feel safe in your space, or having certain people not even allowed in your space at all. Closing the door to your room or closing the door to your office to maintain, it doesn't always have to be verbal. It could be something you do that lets people know that you are not available right now, putting a sign up. That would be a great example of a work boundary too. So again, another overlap where at work, instead of people pleasing in terms of getting work done or something someone else needs you to do during your lunch break, closing your door and putting a sign that says, I'm on my break, I'm unavailable. Material boundaries, so something you own that you don't want someone to touch or handle, or something that's yours that people just use constantly that you don't appreciate. That would be a great area to set boundaries in. And again, like I mentioned, workplace. So figuring out where your boundaries are at work, what your work expectations actually are versus what you're doing that is so much extra work or so much extra just in terms of what people want you to do, kind of walking all over you, that you don't necessarily have to be doing. That is just really increasing your stress levels and draining you. So I hope that this video really helped you get a sense of where to even begin when it comes to setting your own boundaries. Like I said, I will be coming out with a video on techniques and just exercises you can use to begin practicing setting boundaries that may help just kind of guide you in terms of beginning to set boundaries, because it can be kind of scary to step out of that comfort zone of people pleasing and making everybody else happy, things that you're used to doing. So just because it's unhealthy doesn't mean that you don't feel comfortable doing it and that you're not used to doing it, and kind of just shifting away from that into a somewhat uncomfortable space, but a space that is honoring you and giving your power back and respecting your own needs, and eventually just improving your self-esteem and your self-worth and your happiness. Thank you again for joining me today for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below any thoughts you had during this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!